Good morning, everybody. What a great way to start a Sunday to be here with all of you talented musicians and so many familiar faces and names. It's good to see all of you. Today, I thought I would basically just tell you a little bit about what I do and also tell you a little bit about my journey, about how I got here, and some of the things that I've learned along the way. What I do now, for those of you who don't know, is I teach full-time at Towson University, teach percussion there. I began that job 6 years ago and love it. And I also perform. And my performing career has had lots of different flavors over the years. It's had lots of different shapes. And we'll talk about that a little bit more later. But right now, what I do almost exclusively is perform music of the 17th century, 16th a little bit, early 18th, so music of the Baroque era. And it's a subject that I got my doctoral degree in. And it's interesting because a lot of it is timpani. There wasn't a lot of percussion writing in that era. But there was something that I stumbled along in my research, which is that there were musical cultures, like at the court of Versailles during the reign of Louis XIV, 15th, and 16th, long span of time, where we had all these amazing operas that were written by Lully, by Rameau, beautiful, beautiful music. And we know the scores. We see the scores written in their hand. We have the historical scores. And for the most part, you don't really see percussion in there. But we know because of payroll records, because of writings, things that people wrote about that era, that there were percussionists hanging around, and they were in fact performing in many of these operas. But what we don't know is where in the music they played, where in the drama, what instruments, what techniques. And so in a way, my doctoral work and my professional work in the 10 years since has been, I sort of think of it as musical forensics, looking at the artwork from the time, everything from tapestries to engravings in churches and paintings. And that shows me what instruments were known at certain areas and certain places. And then I start to compile the instruments that I'll use in that. And so I do a lot of Baroque timpani playing. I've got my Baroque timpani right here. I'm doing some recording at home. Really my favorite part of the gig is what I call editorial percussion. So these are the times when a conductor will call me and say, okay, we're doing Lully's Armide, and we want you to play percussion. And then I think fresh what I want to do for that opera. And oftentimes it will be music that is portraying something meteorological, something weather, or perhaps it's storms of the soul or witchcraft or anything martial or military. Those are all really obvious choices to me. But I thought what I would do actually is just play for you a snippet of a movement that sort of illustrates this. And so first I'm going to play you just a few seconds of a recording. And this recording is by a French group, and it's Jean-Baptiste Lully, and there's a suite of works that he wrote, and this is one of the movements. It's called March for the Turkish Ceremony. So here's a little bit of what that sounds like, the way the score shows it. Love Lully, love that music, so beautiful. And so in 2006, I had a release on Naxos Records that I performed with Tempesta de Mare in Philadelphia. And for this particular movement, it's called March of the Turks. And the role of the Turks in the history of percussion instruments, I see some of my students here, you know about this. The Turks basically, or what we called the Turks, what the Western Europeans called the Turks, were basically anybody east of them, and they were associated with metallic sounds like cymbals that we hear. Also things like even the bass drum comes to us from Janissary or Janissary music. And so I basically put together a lot of instruments that are replicas of things that existed in that time. and put together a soundtrack for that movement that sounds like this. It's a little bit different. You get the idea. So it's a whole lot of fun. And that's a snapshot of some of what I do. Oops, we got somebody in the waiting room here. Come on in, admit. All right, great. So, so that's what I call editorial percussion. So my path professionally, I'm going to focus mostly on the performing aspects of it. I used to say that it was a very circuitous path, that it had a lot of twists and turns, and I really took the long way to get where I was, but I no longer believe that's true. There have been so many different ways in which I've been fortunate enough to be a musician and they all have made me who I am. So for example, the clip you just heard, I can't say what Lully wanted. I certainly can't say what a percussionist at the court at Versailles played. We have no idea. But I can do my best to recreate the instruments, to recreate the techniques based on the iconography, and to serve the spirit of the music. But I cannot unhear Aretha Franklin or Mahler. I cannot unhear everything I know. And so everything that I've brought in my training so far goes into that. And I value that. I think that's important. I did my undergraduate work at Towson University, and it was Towson State University then. And I then had 3 years before I went to Eastman. And in those 3 years, I taught at the Music and Art Center, and then later worked retail there. I performed a lot of chamber music. I performed in a rock band. And also, like Leslie, wound up temping and learning how to do word processing and all of that, and eventually getting a full-time job at the Chevron Oil Corporation. I realized that in order to really, really do my music, I needed more money. I needed money to buy a marimba. I needed money to have an apartment where I could practice it. And I need money to go to grad school. And I had big ambitions about it. And so I really resisted it for a long time and thought, you know what, I'm going to a full-time job. I'll work all day, I'll practice all night, I'll sleep, I'll get up and do it again. And what's interesting is that I learned so much in that marketing assistant job. I learned so much about administration. I learned about what it takes, what it feels like to put on that kind of outfit every day and be at work and be there 8 hours. And I learned about myself and I learned about people. And I've been in the workforce since I was 13. So I've had lots of opportunities in different ways to learn about people. But when we know about people, we have more to say artistically. We can learn more about ourselves. Each and every one of these jobs is a vital part of what I do. The list of jobs I won't even go down because it's so outrageous and includes some that you just wouldn't even believe. But they've all been interesting. But I remember very specifically one night I was driving home from a gig and it was not a good gig. I mean, it was fine musically, but honestly, I had a really bad attitude about it. I didn't like the music. The circumstances were bad. The pay was not good. I was playing music, but there I was. And I was driving home and I lived downtown and I was driving through a neighborhood, and there are many neighborhoods like this in Baltimore. It was block after block after block of boarded up house. And every few blocks, it was so moving to me. You'd see a house with people living in it. And that really moved me because I thought, here I am. I just got done playing music and somebody paid me. And here I am bitching about it, and look around. I have a warm bed to go home to. I know there's electricity in my house. I know I've got food in my refrigerator, and I know that I will get up and do this again. And I just made a decision right then and there that from that moment forward, every gig, every student, every volunteer thing, every job I did was going to be my dream job. Every single one. I was not going to teach a student that was not my dream student, and I was not going to do a job that wasn't my dream job. And I wasn't going to accomplish it by being super selective and saying, oh no, I'll only take that gig because that gig's perfect. It was a mental switch that I made. And it was incredibly effective, because what happened is, as soon as I decided that I was going to fully give myself to every situation, and all these amazing things started happening, right? Like, I started playing better because I was always way early, and I stayed late to talk to conductors, and couldn't wait to see every student, because I mean, every student is amazing. Everybody who comes to this has passion in their heart, and they have desire to do something great. And so it was really amazing. It completely changed everything. So my first recommendation to every one of you: make every class you take, every gig you take, every student you teach, every job that you're lucky enough to get is your dream job, if you just decide to make it that. And it's funny, because I feel like I'm like, I almost hear myself sounding hokey. I'm like, yeah, it would sound hokey if it doesn't work so well. So that's first recommendation. Um, so one of my earliest jobs professionally was playing drums in a rock band. And I grew up in Salisbury, Maryland, and was fortunate enough to be in a band that was run by a husband and wife. And the bass player was in my class, and she lived around the corner from me. So our parents sort of touched base, and they were thinking, is this okay? Is this not okay? They decided that they recognized that we needed to play music, that we loved this, that we needed to do it. So we made a deal about, you keep your GPA above a certain level and you can play in your rock band. And so my earliest, I was in band, of course. I was in marching band and concert band, and had been. But really, this training was quite remarkable, because when you're sitting behind a drum set and you're watching a group of people dancing, and you realize that the slightest change of what you do with your bass drum, their bodies change. What happens to their bodies is different. It was very interesting. And it was also great training in terms of chamber music, looking around at the people you're playing with, because of course there's no, maybe there was a set list taped to my floor tom, but like, other than that, I'm not reading anything. And so it was really interesting training. The problem came when I was in grad school, and I finished my degree at Eastman, and I stayed on for about another half year in Rochester, and there was an open mic night somewhere, and I jumped behind the drums, and my limbs, they were just like not really working right. I was like, wow, I haven't sat behind a drum set in 2.5 years, and my body needs this training. Like, it's sort of forgotten it. And that was so strange, because I felt like, as stimulated as I was by that environment, I did feel like part of my soul was as a drummer, and part of me was not getting fed. And it was an interesting realization. So I got a new drum set, started playing drums, and started doing both. But I thought of them as two separate things. And in fact, I really believed on some level that, because I had this drum set training and I had this orchestral training, I really believed that, somebody else joining, I really believed that that was a weakness, that was not a strength. And I felt a little bit insecure, like maybe I should have had more orchestral training when I was out in rock bands, and I was principal percussionist for Baltimore Opera Company for 10 years, which was a wonderful, wonderful experience. And I had this awakening. We were doing Carmen, Bizet's Carmen, fabulous opera. And the conductor was awful. And I don't mean he was not a great conductor. I mean, it was nearly mutiny. And the concertmaster, I'll never forget, he came up to each of us who were section leaders and said, okay, in this movement, he brought the orchestra to its knees in one movement the night before. He said, if I see any of you looking at the conductor, you have to buy beer for the entire orchestra after the show. He said, look at me, and we're going to get this done. I was like, whoa, this is like hardcore sedition. And I was sweating bullets because I had this offbeat tambourine part that was so hard. It's hard with a good conductor to play the piece. And I'm staring at him, I won't say his name. and we were just like, I mean, you could just see the sweat pouring down all of our faces, and we're under the stage, of course, we're in the pit, so the audience doesn't really see us. And I realized about halfway through, I had all this tension, and I was like, wait a minute. This is not different from playing a really up-tempo rock tune. This is not that different. Like, relax your body. And I was like, oh, wait a minute, right. And if I were in a band, I wouldn't just be looking at him. I'd be sort of back and forth between watching the hands of the bassists. And I started seeing movement peripherally all around me. And of course, everyone's really trying to communicate physically because we're trying to survive it and not look stupid. And by the end of it, I was completely comfortable. And by the end of it, I was leading from the tambourine because I found that space of confidence that when I sat behind the drum set was always like right there for me. And I realized that not only was it not a problem, but it was one of my greatest strengths as a classical performer. And I had actually been sort of ignoring it. And so it was amazing. I went from a place of feeling a little bit less than to understanding who I am as an artist and what I have to offer, just by taking different experiences and recognizing that they culminate within me. And so I tell you this story because so many of you have done and love concert band, symphonic band, orchestra, marching band. Maybe you love folk music. Maybe you like jazz. Maybe you like improvisation. The thing is, all of these things come together to make you who you are as an artist. And who you are as an artist and who you're going to become, it's totally that snowflake thing. There's nobody else who's going to actually have exactly what you have. And so I think that we're in some ways, maybe not consciously, but somehow I feel like our culture encourages us to draw lines. People say, well, what kind of music do you play? Who are, what's your favorite kind of music? Legitimate questions, and people get curious about that. But I think those lines don't serve us. And I also think that going beyond music, whether it was scooping ice cream or selling bets and cashing wins at the racetrack or being a marketing assistant, all of those things too come into it. And so like for each of you, like, what is it? Scouting, pageants, sports teams? Like, what is it that for you gives you a unique voice and a unique set of skills and confidence, and really like treasure it. Know that it's part of the picture. It's not secondary. So recommendation number 2, understand that your unique combination of earned experience is really valuable, and trust it. Trust it. It will serve you well. And then, so each of you are at a point in your life where you're taking in information, a tremendous amount of information from external sources, right? From your applied teachers, your ensemble directors, your classroom teachers. And it's really important for you, this information. This is going to be the bedrock of your profession, the beginning of your professional career. And as I'm sure you have heard and you know, we never stop learning how to be musicians. We never stop learning how to teach. And I think we never stop learning how to be people and how to be the best possible versions of ourselves, our truest possible versions. But so we're learning, right? And you're learning all this stuff, you're taking it in, you're trying to remember, you're trying to like find out where you can find it later, be organized, like Leslie said, so you can find your information and reflect. It is equally important that you allow space for internal learning, that you begin to learn now how to cultivate a state of mind where you're calm, where you're curious, and we're compassionate with yourself as well as with others. And if you can allow yourself to be in that state and be curious about what's going on and compassionate with yourself, the things that hold you back will start to dissolve. We all have obstacles. We can't just dissolve them all with curiosity and compassion, right? But there's a lot that gets dissolved when we can cultivate that state of mind. It's from a place of curiosity and calm, and I think compassion too, where we can be the most effective performers, definitely the most effective teachers, and even in our relationships with other people, we have more options open to us when we're in that state. options open. And so my last recommendation is learn to cultivate a state within yourself, your version of it. There's no right or wrong version of it, where you're curious and calm and compassionate, and maybe try it before you then think about that space before you go to practice next time, or next time you go into a lesson where you're the student, or a lesson where you're the teacher, or even a performance. I have found that it is really, really helpful on so many levels. And it's a big part of how I survive the rigors of performing at, under really high, you could say high stress circumstances, but it takes the stress away and lets me think about the music. And in recording sessions where that they're spending thousands and thousands of dollars per hour, and one mistake and the whole orchestra has to start again, you've got to be able to have a nice calm space to enter that. And if you're the one who says, I'm so sorry, I blew it in measure 14, you've got to be able to forgive yourself. And you've got to be able to find a way to say, okay, now I'm going to try it again. And I'm going to be calm enough that I can not only survive measure 14, but be present enough to not blow it anywhere else through here, So yeah, that's what I wanted to share with all of you today. Yeah, so I'm looking at I'm not looking at all of you, I'm looking at lots of you. So you can either just unmute yourself or raise your hand or whatever, if anybody has any questions. Quiet bunch. All right.
Quick question. So for editorial percussion, when did you ever hit a wall? And if so, how did you get through hitting that wall? Because you have to do so much creativity, and sometimes creativity doesn't come through.
That's a great question. And yes, actually many times. One of the parts of this work that is the most challenging and of course the most interesting is that I've done a lot of modern day premieres. What that means is, for example, there was a beautiful opera by Monsigny called Le Roi et le Fermier, the King and the Farmer, that was composed for the court of Louis the 16th. Louis the 16th. And it was composed and to be performed at Versailles, and it was composed to be performed with Marie Antoinette singing the role of the ingenue. And it was so popular, it was the most popular opera that day, and then it was never again performed, ever. And so we basically resurrected the opera, and so there was not a single recording of it. So all I had was the music on the page. My students, Malcolm and Zach, who are here, they're better at hearing a score than I am. I can tell you that right now. That has never been a great gift of mine. But to try to create something creative before rehearsals start with nothing but the score is really, really hard. Because I couldn't get the feeling of the music. I had to really ask questions of the choreographer, of the conductor, and then just kind of go with a whole lot of instruments and be ready to turn on a dime. So my biggest roadblocks come with trying to create the parts. But when I create the parts, I always have several versions. So I go into rehearsals and say, hey, in this movement, here's my favorite thing, but that may not be what you want, so let's try this. And oftentimes I'm still changing the parts all the way through the last performance of it. The only time I try to play it exactly the same over and over again is when we're recording. So that's one way that I hit a block with it. Another thing that is problematic sometimes is that I'll have a really strong idea about what I think I want it to be, and somebody else will have a really, really different idea. I guess the hardest part is when I hear a movement and I don't want any percussion in it. I feel it should have nothing, and somebody really wants percussion. And then I have to learn to put my instincts down and open my heart up in my mind to something that somebody else hears. I guess I got to that third, but that's really the hardest one. So again, it comes down to being open. It comes down to being calm and sort of trying to cultivate a state of a little Zen relaxation about it. It's a good question.
Thank you.
Yeah. Yeah. Hey, Emily.
What would you say was the biggest challenge for you as a woman in, I guess, essentially a male-dominated field, especially in percussion, but in like an orchestra in general? Like, what was the biggest challenge for you?
I feel like I've been very fortunate. I mean, since I grew up playing, percussion, I, dealt with so much BS always, in the back of the band room where the band director wasn't paying attention. Um, uh, but in my professional career, I had one completely sexist conductor who said something stupid once in a rehearsal. That was not an obstacle for me. It was notable. Um, I don't know that I've been very fortunate in that if I've had obstacles, they were invisible to me. Perhaps there are jobs I didn't get because I'm a woman. I don't know. Um, um, but I would say this, there have been more times than I can count on both hands when I have been talking with one of my mentors, and by the way, develop them, have them, or other female colleagues in music or elsewhere, where one of us had a problem, what felt serious, felt loaded emotionally, a difficult professional problem, and where the answer to the problem came like something like this: what would you do if you were a guy? Would you be worrying about this if you were a guy? How would you communicate? And it's a sexist answer to it. I realize that now. It is, because it assumes that here's women, here's men, and we're not humans together. That's ridiculous. But I think that it comes out of a place of noticing that sometimes in professional interactions, my male colleagues, regardless of what they're feeling in their hearts, seemed to be able to brush things off, walk things off with a little less angst, a little less worry. And you could just as easily pick a woman who can shake things off in flight and say, well, what would she do, right? I think that would be just as maybe even a more effective way of doing that. But I think that to channel that sort of male energy has come up so many times, and it's funny. Whether it's legitimate or not, I don't know. But I think that really what it comes down to is being able to say for myself, for any of us, whether we're male, female, neither, both, we have to be able to trust ourselves and not get too caught up in what other people are concerned about or doing or whatever. So I don't think I answered your question, but it was a good one. Thanks, Emily.
That was it. Thank you.
So Jacqueline, should I make you the host again?
Great. Yep, that would be perfectly fine. Great. So thank you, Michelle. And next up is Selena.